specific focus on children's rights to a healthy and sustainable environment. We are delighted so many of you are curious and interested to learn about this project and these tools, as the series is intended to be by civil society and for civil society. My name is Laura Abado, and I work for Save the Children Sweden. And together with Inda Abayan from the regional network CRC Asia, we are co-conveners of Child Rights Connect's working group on child rights and the environment, and will be moderating today's launch. Before we start, we have some housekeeping rules we would like to bring to your attention. So first, the webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording with all of you afterwards, together with all related documentation. There is interpretation available in French and Spanish, so simply click the language option that you see on your screens. Please also be aware that we have some child participants, so please don't use technical language as much as possible, and no acronyms. This is a friendly, safe, and empowering space for children and adults alike. You have read a code of conduct when you signed up for the event, and it is being shared shortly in the chat box. Concerning child safeguarding, my colleague June Leo is the child participation and safeguarding focal point today. If any issues of concern to you arise, please make contact with June, and she will put her email in the chat box for you now. Please feel free to type your name and organization and where you come from in the chat box. It's always nice to know who's here today. If you have questions, we will probably have questions as the webinar unfolds. Please use, instead of the chat box, use the Q&A space that you see on your screens. Our colleagues from CRIN, Child Rights Connect, and Save the Children will answer as many questions as we possibly can. And we will also share a Q&A in 3 languages after the webinar. We will also pick up some questions you will raise during the webinar, or from those questions that you sent when you registered, answered by the panelists later on during the question and answer part. So if you have any question to a specific panelist, it will be helpful if you mention the name of the panelist you would like to ask a question to. So now that we have clarified all this, let me go back to today's agenda. I will begin by sharing a brief introduction about the How to Child Rights series. And then we will have a panel of civil society advocates and practitioners who will lead our discussion about the various civil society tools developed during the past 1.5 years, and how these tools can support civil society's efforts to advance children's rights to a healthy and sustainable environment. We will then hear some reflections from Professor Benya Mezmoul, member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, before closing the launch by telling you how you can engage in the series moving forward. So please note that Inda will introduce all the panelists in much more detail in a few minutes. So what is this How to Child Rights series? It's a series of practical tools, and with tools I mean guidance, toolkits, or case studies that are developed by civil society in collaboration with academia and others. They are written mainly for adult practitioners from within the child rights or the human rights civil society sector, but also older children who are active as human rights defenders may find them useful. The objective is to inspire each other on how to apply the human rights-based approach in practice in our daily work, and show how we can contribute actively in making legal and political commitments to children a reality. It was launched on the 16th of February, and a range of tools are already available on our website. There will be a link shared with you in the chat. We are regularly updating the website with new tools and curated collection of already existing tools relevant to different themes and that fit the criteria of this series. So please don't hesitate to contact us and share with us practical guidance and case studies that you find useful for your work and that you would advise other colleagues to benefit from, to use. As far as budgeting has allowed, some of these tools are translated into French and Spanish, and these tools are tested and piloted as much as possible in different contexts, and they will be improved based on the feedback we get from the practitioners. So today is the first launch of series of webinars coming up in the next months to launch these various tools, and we will give you more information about that a bit later. So The climate and environmental crisis, extreme weather events, loss of biodiversity, environmental pollution is a child rights crisis and a grave threat to children's survival and development, health, education, protection, and their other rights set out in the UN and regional human rights treaties. Without addressing the crisis head-on, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, especially for boys and girls most impacted by inequality and discrimination and their families. And we risk losing the hard-fought progress made towards realizing children's rights as set in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. While the threat to children's rights posed by environmental degradation and climate change is not new, the call to action is louder and more imminent than ever. This was most recently confirmed by the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report. We have also seen efforts to listen and to amplify the views and voices of children and youth. Perhaps the most significant of all is children's own actions and strikes that help make their demands onto the political agenda. Both the UN and African child rights committees have stepped up their efforts on children's rights and the environment. And the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child is currently developing a general comment to guide implementation of the convention in light of the subject, including a focus on climate change. We have also seen increased attention to children's rights in reports of UN special rapporteurs dealing with environmental issues. And in the past year, and in 2021, the Human Rights Council adopted several resolutions that are really very important for the issue of today. And today, March 10, the issue will occupy states and other actors involved in the Human Rights Council session going on, and also in the session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Just to mention some examples that show how much attention this issue is getting. And on the civil society side, we are many today here who are active in various ways at local, national, regional, and international levels, through direct support to communities and children affected by extreme weather events, through campaigns, through advocacy, litigation, or capacity building, etc. So today we will share with you some of the tools that several organizations have developed together as part of the How to Child Rights series, that focus on how to use UN and regional human rights frameworks to report on the effects of environmental harm, including climate change, on children, and how we could make more systematic use in our daily work of the UN Human Rights Council resolution on children's rights through a healthy environment. And through today's discussion and the tools being presented, we would like to encourage a broad network of civil society practitioners from around the globe to engage more actively on the topic of children's rights to a healthy environment, but also to use and disseminate the tools being presented. I will now show you a short film about the tools. Over to you, June.
Ever wondered how to apply the UN Human Rights Council resolution on children's rights and the environment in practice? Well, there's a how-to guide for that.
The How to Child Rights tools are guidance relating to different issues affecting children's rights.
They are practical, short, demystifying, replicable, tried and tested.
They are in essence by civil society for civil society.
The topic of the environment is certainly developing in a very dynamic way. It is in these contexts that the How-To series could make a real difference.
The key challenge is that many decision makers don't think of climate change as a human rights issue at all. This tool is a written case study that describes Save the Children's successful advocacy to highlight the impact of the climate crisis on children's rights in Australia, using the United Nations Universal Periodic Review, or the UPR.
You'll find this tool and many others on the Save the Children's Resource Centre.
Tell us whether you like it, what else you want to see, any questions that you have.
You've now heard some feedback from different persons involved in the tools. I will actually now give the floor to Inda to present to the panel and continue the discussion there. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Can you hear me? Okay, we are delighted to be joined today by experienced and passionate child rights advocates from different parts of the world. And they will help us get to know more about the following tools, which June will also show you via a PowerPoint, and to share their intended value to us, child rights advocates from civil society. So the first, maybe you can go back to the first slide, June. Yeah, while June is doing that, first of the tools that will be launched today is the guidance on the reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is currently available in Spanish, French, and English, and will have speakers from Albania and Côte d'Ivoire to share their respective experiences. And then the second tool is one that will help us maximize the opportunities in engaging the Universal Periodic Review, and will have colleagues who will share about the case from Australia. The third tool will guide us CSOs on how to maximize and localize the landmark resolution by the Human Rights Council on children's rights to a healthy environment. To tell us more about these tools, I invite our panelists to turn on their cameras as I introduce them for our discussion today. So we have first Sean McCabe, the Climate Justice Policy Specialist from Children's Rights Environmental Initiative. He's joining us from Ireland. Good afternoon, Sean. And then we'll also have joining from Albania is Edlira Nyen Jesse. I'm so sorry if I pronounce that incorrectly, Edlira. She's the program. Yes?
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So she's the program implementation manager of Save the Children Albania. Hi, Edlira. And then also joining us from Albania is Elsa. She's a 16-year-old child advocate from Albania, representing Voice 16+. And then hi, Elsa. And then we'll also have Luis Mongiro, the acting Executive Secretary at Forum des ONG, Association de l'Enfance. It's a child rights coalition in Ivory Coast. Bonjour, Luis. And then someone from Australia has prepared a video for us as it was too late for him to join the webinar today, but Howard Chu of Save the Children Australia will be showing a recorded message from him later. And then we'll also have Susie Talbot, the founder and director of Anima Mundi Law Initiative, who's joining us from UK. Hi, Susie.
Hi, everyone.
And then, as mentioned by Laure, after the panel discussion, we will hear some reflections from Professor Benyam Dawit Mezmur. Benyam is a member and former chairperson of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. He also served in the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. He is a professor of law at the University of the Western Cape and is currently a visiting fellow at the Human Rights Program of Harvard Law School. Helping us with the translation in Spanish is Almia. Hi, Almia. And for French, we have Teresa. Again, please do not forget to select the channels for these interpretations. So to begin with our discussion, let me start by asking Sean. Hi again, Sean. You work for Children's Environmental Rights Initiative, or CERI, the coalition who developed guidance on the reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child on issues of the environment. Could you please tell us what the tool is about and share how it can be useful for us, CSO practitioners and children human rights defenders? Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Inda, and it's a pleasure to be here.
I think the tool is ultimately quite a simple concept. We know that children are more exposed to environmental harm than potentially any other group in the world, and we need to use the processes available to us to highlight that vulnerability, to make the link between children's rights and environmental harm, and to build the capacity and awareness of civil society, of decision makers and of others to come up with evidence-driven solutions that can help us protect children's rights, as we see in the photographs or the videos from Australia this morning. Just a continuation of a vast array of environmental harms that will have continue into the future and continue to have very grievous effects on the well-being of children in particular. So the tool was, it's actually existed for a couple of years, and my colleague Joni Pengram did a lot of the drafting of it. And it primarily focuses on where the links are already being made in reports to the committee between environmental rights and children's rights, so that we can learn from that and proliferate, expand, increase the number of recommendations coming forward in that regard. So it draws on examples that already exist, and it looks to explain the reporting process such that it could be picked up by a civil society group, maybe an environmental civil society group that doesn't typically engage on the issue of children's rights, or a children's rights group that doesn't normally engage on the topic of environment, and begin to merge those two worlds. And I think I'll leave time, because we have very valuable insights on the actual implementation of that tool, which I think is more valuable than me talking about it.
Thanks, Sean. And I'm sure you will stay on for the discussion. Now let's turn to our colleague who piloted the tool in Albania. Hi again, Edlira. So when it was, So when it was time for civil society organizations to prepare for a complementary report to the state report on the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, I understand that you, together with colleagues at Save the Children Albania, supported Voice 16 Plus, a child-led group, in preparing a child-led report focusing on children's rights and the environment. Can you please share why this decision was made and how useful was the tool for you when you were doing the task?
Yeah, thank you, Inda, for having me. My pleasure to be part of this webinar. In fact, Save the Children in Albania has been working with groups of children towards increasing their capacity building and their empowerment for monitoring and reporting child rights for more than 20 years now. And this whole experience has clearly proven that children's rights defenders have played a key role to ensure a more comprehensive and objective vision of the processes that involve children and their rights in the country. And our experience has also shown that there are many ways in which children can engage in all steps of the reporting cycles, regardless of their age, background, or circumstances. And there are many good practices, in fact. And the incorporation of the voice of children in the written reports, the testimony of their concrete experiences, contributes significantly to enhance the dialogue between the committees and the states. And having in mind this important role of children as child rights defenders, the fact that children have the right to participate in the cycle of the Committee on the Right of the Child in the same way as adults do, and as well as considering the critical impact of the environmental issues pose to children's survival and development, health, education, protection, and other rights set out in the UN and regional human rights treaties, we decided to again support the groups of children to write a child-led alternative report, and this time to be particularly focused on environmental and climate change related issues, having in mind the importance of these issues nowadays. And Save the Children has previous experience in supporting groups of children to write monitoring reports, even including UPR and CRC, but this was our first time supporting children to write a dedicated report on environmental and climate change related issues. So in addition to challenges related to child-led CRC reporting process, we had also to deal with technical issues on how to report to the Committee on Child Rights and Environment, and the development process of the report, in fact, started exactly at the moment when we were introduced for the first time with the tool on child rights and environment. So immediately, as soon as we got information about this tool, we found it quite relevant for the process and helpful for the process of writing child-led alternative report, in addition to other tools we have been using to facilitate the reporting process. And in this frame, we first used the tool as a guiding document for our team, for Save the Children team. The tool served as a main reference throughout the child-led report development process, serving as the main guidance, particularly for the main issues that could be identified and raised in a child-led CRC alternative report, as well as very helpful in terms of highlighting the expected role obligation from the state level authorities in terms of the child rights and environment, climate change related issues. And taking into account that it's equally important that children are also provided with the necessary information to be able to take actions, we also use the tool as a key reference document to inform children on the process. The tool was also introduced to groups of children through an interactive capacity building workshop where children received detailed information on why to report on child rights and environment, why it's important, what kind of issues they can raise, what are the specific provisions that closely relate to environmental protection, as well as the specific duties, obligation in relation to child rights and the environment. Currently, we have finalized the child-led CRC alternative report, and at the end of the process, we can say that the tool was quite informative, continuously guided us throughout the process. It was quite clear and easy to understand for Save the Children team, and that is why we can say that we managed to come out with significant results in this process. The tool was easy to read, concise, and we would definitely recommend to other non-for-profit organizations which work with environmental issues as well as for the realization of child rights. We do have just a recommendation from our side coming to the end of the process that a child-friendly version of this guide would be really helpful, as well as to facilitate the child-led report writing process. Definitely, we do have a long experience, and we as team tried to translate, and definitely was kind of, when we introduced to children, we did it in a child-friendly way, but having a dedicated child-friendly version would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Edlira. And of course, we're happy that Elsa of Voice 16 Plus is here too, to share the perspectives of a child as child rights practitioner. Hello again, Elsa.
Hello.
Yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay.
I will now ask you, can you please tell us about Voice 16 Plus and your experience in developing the child-led report that focuses on children's rights and the environment in Albania?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, I'm part of this group. I'm part of child-led group Voice 16 Plus Duras. a group of children supported from Save the Children Albania, of course, that is operating here in Albania since 2000. As part of this group, me along with my peers, of course, have been advocating for the protection and promotion of child rights issues, including here a lot of issues such as child participation in decision-making, discrimination, violence, access to education, social care, online safety, healthy environment, etc. We tend to bring the voice of children to the society and monitor child rights implementation in Albania. We have taken continuous action here to address many child rights issues, including that are concerning us to all levels, including here a local, national, and international. Monitoring and reporting children's rights in Albania is one of the main objectives of this group. In frame of this project, the newest project, Children Stand Up, we have had the opportunity to focus our activities, particularly on issues related to environment and climate changes. In this frame, supported by the Save the Children, here in Albania, we have been working to develop a child alternative report with specific focus on issues that are related to environment and climate changes that are going to submit after in a committee on child rights as part of CRC alternative reporting process. Also, starting from the June last year, we have been intensively working or identifying our concerns related to environmental and climate change issues in Albania, focusing especially to the ones that directly or indirectly are focus that are affect our life, as well as main recommendation that needs to be taken by the governmental authorities to address these issues. Also, we are now aware that climate change is badly affecting us now, and there is need for us to do something for it, especially when it comes to address this issue related to greenhouse gases and greenhouse effects. We have also linked that each individual should take action to fight climate change, because that is because fighting climate change is everyone's responsibility, including us as children also. Being aware on issues related to the pollution of environment and how this is affecting our life, we decided to work for the development of the specific alternative report on climate change issues, considering this as a key action in bringing changes in this area. Our work for the development of the reported is based on specific evidence that we have managed to collect with the support of Save the Children also, including through air pollution monitoring devices and the research study for the impact air of pollution in children's health. Me and my peers are directly engaged with this collection of the data, either measuring the air pollution level at the schools settings through the air pollution monitor devices, as well as in the collection of data of the research study, including the completion of questionnaires being part of the focus groups discussion, etc. Throughout the process of the CRC alternative report development, me, as Adlira said before, we have been guided from Save the Children regarding the way of reporting based on the tool, guidance on reporting to the community on the rights of children, which has really helped us to organize our thoughts about the issues that we wanted to raise. It really helped us to understand why it is important to report on children's rights and the environment. Also, it helped us to understand what are the main risks that these issues bring to children. Also, what are some of the issues we can report as well as know the main duties of states in relation to child rights and the environment. Currently, we have finalized our report, which is really submitted to the community of on child rights, where specific issues related to waste collection, lack of recreational development and entertainment facilities, green spaces, etc., are including here and a high level of dioxide carbon. we are listened to among the main issues we would like to raise throughout this report. We intend to use this CRC alternative report as a key document when we will discuss with politicians, policymakers, and other stakeholders on environmental and climate change issues. We know that they are usually think that we are just children, but we really want to convince that we are children, but we have our thoughts about this theme, and we have our own opinions about this theme, and we want to bring changes, our voice to be heard, to be taken, our opinions to consideration with politics, law, and development. This law also. We can meaningfully contribute to this theme and to participate in climate policy actions. So it means that, and we, that our children, we can too do something. I want to thank you all for this opportunity to be part of this event and to share my experience.
Thank you, Elsa, and thank you to your team at Voice 16 Plus. It's a very good initiative that can inspire more children exercise their right to participate in issues of environment. And it's very good to emphasize that you are not just children, but you, as you mentioned, you were able to exercise evidence-based advocacy work, which is one of the advice of the tool. And we think that even I, as adult, should learn from your experience on that. Thanks again, Elsa. So related to Edlira's mention about a need for a child-friendly version, I would like to share that in partnership with Terre des Hommes Germany, Child Rights Coalition Asia is developing a child-friendly version of the guidance. And we hope that will be of use for everyone. I will keep everyone posted, and also my colleagues from CRC Asia will keep everyone posted about this as soon as it's completed. And as I mentioned earlier, the tool was also piloted by Child Rights Network of Ivory Coast and the Association des Enfants et Jeunes Travailleurs de Côte d'Ivoire, or AEJT, for the development of both an adult-led complementary report and child-led report. I would like to ask now Louise, again, bonjour Louise. How has the guidance on the reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child? Hi.
Bonjour à tous.
How has the guidance on the reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child? Louise? Hello, Louise?
Pour la protection de l'enfant au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire.
Louise?
Effectivement, nous avons...
Louise?
Vous m'entendez?
Alors, Louise, vous êtes je pense que vous êtes dans la partie français. Il faut que vous quittez la partie français. Un moment, il faut que vous alliez à off, en haut, là, vous quittez la partie langue. Et attendez juste une seconde, qu'on va donner une instruction à tous les participants de changer de canal de langue. Juste un instant, Louise. On vous donne un signe quand il faut commencer, d'accord?
OK.
OK, merci.
I am so sorry for interrupting you, Louise, but just to clarify, the question is, how has the guidance on the reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child been useful to prepare the complementary reports on the status of the implementation of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child? And please also share if there are any areas to improve in the guidance based on your experience. I would like to note to everyone that Louise will be speaking in French, and I request participants who want English translations to click on the French channel. For those of you who want to hear the Spanish translation, please stay on in the Spanish channel. Laure is also indicating this advice in the chat box. So yes, please, Louise, I'm so sorry again.
OK. Merci à tous et je disais encore bonjour et merci de nous associer à cet événement qui est très important pour le droit de l'enfant et particulièrement en Côte d'Ivoire. Et nous avons utilisé le guide STERI pour l'élaboration du rapport complémentaire relatif à la Charte africaine des droits de l'enfant. En Côte d'Ivoire, nous avons conduit 2 rapports complémentaires. D'une part, un rapport complémentaire mené par la société civile sous le lead du Forum des ONG, qui est le réseau ivoirien des organisations de protection de l'enfant. Et d'une autre part, un rapport conduit par les enfants sous le lead de l'Association des enfants et jeunes travailleurs de Côte d'Ivoire, avec une assistance technique et financière de Save the Children et de l'Agence de développement suédoise internationale. Et donc, il était question pour nous de faire l'analyse du guide lui-même. Et nous avons compris que le guide a été conçu pour la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant. Et dans l'analyse, il s'intéressait particulièrement au chapitre relatif à l'éducation, à la santé. Il s'adressait également à la liberté d'expression et d'information, d'association et à la liberté de réunion. Dans ce travail, nous avons mis en relief la Charte africaine et la Convention. Et dans les textes, quand on lit, la Charte est l'expansion même de la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant. Et nous avons visé les thématiques qui annexent nous avons adressé plutôt les chapitres qui annexent aussi les thématiques similaires, telles que la santé, l'éducation, la liberté d'expression. Et par exemple, au niveau de la santé, nous avons fait référence à l'article 14 de la Charte qui dit « Tout enfant a le droit de jouir d'une santé physique, morale et spirituelle possible. » L'alinéa 2 du chapitre 14 de l'article 14 dit également que l'État partie s'engage à prendre des mesures à plusieurs fins, y compris la réduction de la mortalité prénatale et infantile, ainsi que des mesures liées à la qualité de l'alimentation et de l'eau potable. Dans notre contexte ivoirien, nous nous rendons compte qu'il y a un impact sur la santé de l'enfant et aussi sur la mortalité infantile due à la pollution de l'atmosphère imputable à la gestion des déchets domestiques. En ce qui concerne la liberté d'expression et la liberté d'association, et nous avons fait référence à l'article 7 et 8 de la Charte, et ce qui concerne l'expression et l'information, le droit à l'expression et à l'information libre de l'enfant dans tous les domaines. Aussi à la liberté du rassemblement pacifique, conformément aux lois du pays. Cependant, chez nous, en Côte d'Ivoire, nous constatons que les organisations d'enfants, défenseurs des droits de l'homme et de l'enfant, ne sont pas assez actives dans le domaine. En plus de cela, on peut même parler de leur inexistence. Au niveau de l'éducation, on a fait référence à l'article 11 de la Charte qui concerne la promotion et le développement de la personnalité de l'enfant, ainsi que de sa responsabilité, de ses talents et puis de ses capacités mentales et physiques. À ce propos, on a constaté aussi l'insuffisance de l'information sur le sujet. On dira aussi que même l'information n'existe pas. Dans les ménages, on n'en parle pas de la question de l'environnement. Même dans le cursus scolaire, on voit le droit des enfants, on inclut un chapitre droit des enfants, un module droit des enfants dans le cursus scolaire. Mais il n'y a pas encore de module dans le cursus scolaire concernant l'environnement et les risques environnementaux. Dans les médias non plus, personne n'en parle. Et donc, il est de notre devoir en tant que société civile de communiquer sur ça aux enfants, mais aussi même aux adultes. Il faut par ailleurs saluer la simplicité et la clarté du guide. Ce guide situe la nature même des risques environnementaux qui assujettissent le droit de l'enfant. Et il dénote de la pertinence de porter cette question devant les différents comités et faire prendre conscience aux États de l'impact sur les droits de l'enfant. Aussi, nous avons remarqué que dans le guide, les observations finales du comité à propos des questions de l'environnement ont été incluses. Et ces observations nous ont orientés dans des domaines spécifiques à argumenter dans le rapport complémentaire. Par exemple, les questions relatives à la détérioration de l'environnement, à la pollution et à l'utilisation des produits chimiques dangereux. De ces aspects, nous avons aussi identifié des impacts directs sur la santé de l'enfant, sur la mortalité infantile, sur l'appauvrissement du sol et aussi sur l'intoxication des eaux, qui sont les ressources du pays. Nous avons aussi l'impact sur l'agriculture et sur les revenus quotidiens des familles, parce que les familles sont majoritairement agricoles et cela impacte directement le niveau de l'alimentation de l'enfant. Nous pouvons aussi dire que le comité des experts africains a adressé des recommandations en 2019, bon, je me rappelle plus bien de la date, mais ils ont adressé des recommandations récemment. Mais ils n'ont pas fait des recommandations spécifiques sur la question de l'environnement. C'est pour cela, dans la collecte des données, nous avons posé des questions transversales pour pouvoir permettre aux enfants et puis aux populations d'intervenir sur les risques environnementaux, les questions environnementales qu'ils observent au quotidien dans la société, dans leur ville et tout ça. Pour conclure, qu'est-ce que je peux dire? C'est une recommandation que je fais. Il est important pour nous d'adapter le guide série et même d'en développer des outils complémentaires afin de mieux pouvoir inclure les questions de protection de l'enfant contre les effets néfastes de l'environnement et du changement climatique dans le rapport complémentaire de la Charte africaine des droits de l'enfant. Aussi, dans le rapport alternatif de l'examen périodique universel. Ce sont des besoins cruciaux. Donc, nous avons besoin de ces outils également. Nous sommes en train de finaliser aussi le rapport complémentaire de la Charte en Côte d'Ivoire. Nous serons intéressés et nous avons commencé aussi à impliquer les enfants. Et nous espérons partir travailler avec les enfants devant le comité, les voir exposer en impliquant vraiment les questions relatives à l'environnement et puis donner leur point de vue et leur vécu quotidien. Et à travers ce guide, il a été simple de comprendre pour les enfants l'utilité d'inclure et la nécessité d'inclure ce rapport. Et je pense que, pardon, la question environnementale. Et je pense que ce outil servira aussi d'outil de sensibilisation auprès des enfants eux-mêmes, auprès des autorités et auprès de nous, les acteurs de la profession. Merci.
Merci. Merci, Louise. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing how the tool also guided you in your heavy work in advocacy. So, and I request Louise, Edlira, and Elsa to please stay on as we will have a Q&A later. Now, I would also like to remind our participants to go back to their language channels as we will continue in English. Thank you, and please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box. To share more about the second tool, to share more about the second tool and their experience in documenting their engagements of the Universal Periodic Review process in promoting the recommendations on children's rights, climate change, and the environment to the Australian government, the How to Advocate for Children's Rights in the Climate Crisis through Universal Periodic Review, we will show a recorded message by Howard Chu. of Save the Children Australia. Thank you.
I'm Save the Children's Australian Policy and Advocacy Lead, and I'm very pleased to introduce this case study about advocating for children's rights in the climate crisis.
Howard, could you tell me what your tool is about?
This tool is a written case study that describes Save the Children's successful advocacy to highlight the impact of the climate crisis on children's rights in Australia, using the United Nations Universal Periodic Review, or the UPR, process which culminated in 2021. The UPR is a regular 5-year review process in which the human rights record of every United Nations member state is reviewed by its peers, who can make recommendations for improvement. In this case, it was Australia being reviewed and children's rights were a major focus.
How does this case study contribute to advancing children's rights, and in particular children's right to a healthy and sustainable environment?
The case study provides a guide for civil society actors who wish to influence national policymakers to take children's rights seriously, including by acting on climate change and listening to children. And in particular, it describes how to use the UPR mechanism, going into practical detail about steps to follow and tips along the way.
How can the case study inspire other civil society practitioners?
I hope the case study shows that human rights mechanisms can be a powerful way to create positive change for children's rights and on climate change, and also that currently underutilised processes such as the UPR have a real potential to encourage changes in national policy.
What are the key steps you've undertaken to influence Universal Periodic Review recommendations on children's rights and the environment and climate change?
The key objective of this advocacy was to persuade other member states or countries to make recommendations to Australia about better fulfilling children's rights, listening to children and acting on climate change. And this was because we believe that if a number of countries made those recommendations, that would increase pressure on the Australian government to act. So I'll briefly summarise the advocacy process that we followed, and the case study document goes into this in a lot more detail. But in summary, we started by analysing the child rights landscape in Australia, and that identified climate change as a priority for children's rights. That was then translated into specific recommendations that we hoped that other countries would make to Australia. And importantly, we worked in coalition with around 200 other non-government organisations in Australia to highlight deficiencies in Australia's human rights performance, including on climate change. So the advocacy that Save the Children did on children's rights and climate change in particular was part of a much larger coalition piece of work that was undertaken across Australian civil society. The key advocacy work that we did, apart from the work directed at the Australian government itself, was to meet with representatives of other countries. So those were typically missions and embassies to Australia based in Australia. And in those meetings, we described the child rights situation in Australia, talked about the key deficiencies, and highlighted the recommendations that they could most usefully make to the Australian government, including about climate change. The key moment was then Australia's appearance before the Human Rights Council in January 2021, which is where those other countries made their recommendations to Australia about improvements in Australia's human rights record. A large number of those recommendations were about children's rights, and in particular there were 8 recommendations that other countries made about climate change, including some that were specifically in reference to climate change and children, which was a very successful outcome. And one way of measuring that is by comparing that to Australia's previous review 5 years previously, where there were 0 recommendations made to Australia about climate change. Following that appearance in January 2021, the Australian government again appeared before the Human Rights Council in July of 2021, where it responded to the recommendations. And since then, we've had an ongoing process of following up with the Australian government, both to ensure there's accountability for the recommendations they've accepted and to continue to seek to persuade them to adopt the recommendations that they rejected.
What were your main challenges?
The key challenge is that many decision makers don't think of climate change as a human rights issue at all. And for example, the Australian government has resisted acknowledging that climate change is covered by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, despite clear statements by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child that it is. And of course, that's one of the things that we're trying to change through our advocacy.
What would would be your top 3 tips you'd like to give to other civil society practitioners, including children's human rights defenders, wishing to use the Universal Periodic Review procedure to report on the effects of environmental harm, including climate change, on children's rights in their country?
First, be clear, realistic and focused about what you're trying to achieve. Take the time to develop specific recommendations that you want other states to make to the country under review, and be consistent in how you advocate for them. Second, work in coalitions with other NGOs wherever possible. Put in the time to build strong relationships and ensure everyone has a shared strategy and key messages. Many voices are better than one, but only when they're all saying the same thing. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, stay optimistic. The scale of the problem of climate change is enormous, but it's far from hopeless. Children are leading on the issue of climate change, most visibly through the global Fridays for Future and School Strikes for Climate movement. Their leadership has been galvanising in focusing the public and governments on both climate change and on children's rights and the importance of children's rights. There are many tools available to us to address the climate crisis. Human rights mechanisms like the UPR are a powerful example.
Thanks to Howard and our colleagues at Save the Children Australia. To share more about the value of engaging the Universal Periodic Review process, I would like to again ask Sean. Hi again, Sean. Yeah.
Hi guys.
So with I understand that SERI, with the support of the United Nations Environmental Program, or UNEP, you are developing a toolkit about how to advocate for children's rights in the climate crisis through the Universal Periodic Review. So please tell us more how important the UPR process is for us at the civil society sector.
Certainly. If it's all right with you, I might briefly share some slides. I don't have very many, so no need to panic. But yes, as you say, SERI has been working with the UN Environment Programme and SAVE and others to develop a toolkit, something similar to what was discussed in the first section of this panel on the reporting to the CRC. But this one will be focused on the Universal Periodic Review process. Just a word on why it's important. Obviously, there is the significant evidence that now attests to the fact that no group is more vulnerable to environmental harm than children. And the UPR process, as all state, all rights, and collaborative process, provides a powerful tool to raise awareness both of child rights and environmental advocates, and also decision makers, on practical steps that can be taken to protect children's environmental rights. So it's a highly visible and high level process, and really offers an opportunity to bring that conversation on children's environmental rights to the international level and increase the scrutiny of and commitment to children's environmental rights at the national level. And it also provides an opportunity to share best practice and understand those capacity building requirements at the national level to protect children's environmental rights. I think this is a very important graph which my colleague Joni put together, looking at the 33,000 plus recommendations that have come out under the third UPR cycle. Of them, you can see the blue squares, each square comprising 100 recommendations. So a significant number of blue squares. In fact, child rights is a top 3 issue coming up under the UPR process. However, down here in the red, you see that only 62 of those 33,000 recommendations focused on children's environmental rights. So as such, the UPR process is hugely underutilized in terms of bringing a focus to children's environmental rights. Just quickly in that same analysis, what is coming up as we've just heard, climate change makes up a significant amount of the discourse on children's environmental rights under the UPR So we're looking now at, sorry, they shouldn't be percentages, apologies, they're numbers. We're looking at how do you expand environmental risks, pollution, natural disasters, and other focuses of such. So the toolkit that we've mentioned, just to point out what it will do, it will provide us with some examples of environmental harm and the links between those and children's rights to help groups become discursive in those issues. It will also include a discussion on the obligations of states with respect to children's environmental rights. And then looking at existing recommendations and drawing on other sources, it will provide details on how to formulate UPR recommendations based on children's environmental rights. And finally, it will provide strategies for increasing the focus on children's environmental rights under the UPR process. And it's important to note that these strategies cover how states can increase the focus on children's environmental rights, how civil society actors can advocate, as we've been hearing in the Australian case study, and how we can enable the participation of children in that UPR process to bring a greater focus on environmental rights. So that's it, short and sweet, but I think taken with the presentation of the SAVE case study of Australia, I think the two will dovetail nicely and provide quite a comprehensive overview of how civil society actors and others can really make use of a very underutilized resource, which is the UPR.
Thanks, Sean. We look forward to hearing from you when the tool is available. And moving on to the third tool, to help us understand more about how now the UN resolutions can be a useful tool for child rights civil society organizations working in different levels, we will now turn to Susie Talbot from the Anima Mundi Law Initiative. Susie.
Thanks, Inda.
I would like to ask you, because I understand that in collaboration with Save the Children, Child Rights Connect, Terre des Hommes, and other partners, you developed a guidance on how to make use of the landmark Human Rights Council resolution adopted in 2020. And can you please tell us a bit about this tool and who it is aimed at and how it can be used to promote children's right to a healthy environment?
Sure. Thanks, Inda, and pleasure to be on the panel today. So to give a bit of context, in October 2020, the UN Human Rights Council issued a resolution focused for the very first time on the relationship between children's rights and a healthy environment. So this was a moment at the international level where states came together to really highlight the importance of this issue and to issue a series of recommendations as to what states and others should do in practice to support this relationship through the human rights framework. So the resolution was incredibly significant for a number of reasons. Firstly, the recommendations set out in the resolution really help governments and others to navigate and be quite specific about the urgent action that's needed to address the interrelated climate, environmental, pollution crises, and also provide a framework for thinking over the longer term about building adaptation strategies, institutions and practices that allow us to live in harmony with the natural world. So it was an important contribution to shifting beyond our traditional silos of human rights on the one hand and environmental justice on the other. And secondly, and specifically, these recommendations are grounded in a child's rights perspective, which is mentioned already on the panel. We know that children suffer or experience different, disproportionate and longer term impacts connected with environmental harms. And it's really important that a child's rights perspective and children's leadership are really foregrounded in conversations going forward. So given its significance, the aim was to create a tool that amplified the impact of this resolution and make sure as many people as possible are aware of the recommendations, which are incredibly helpful, and are encouraged to, and they feel able to take concrete action to put them into practice in their daily lives, their national context, their regional context, to address systemic issues and across all parts of the world. So as mentioned already, this is primarily for child rights practitioners, but also for children themselves, and for people in governments, in academia and other spaces who are interested in and committed to implementing the resolution. So it was developed in a form to be practical, accessible, and relatively short, given that we recognize the time constraints of many organizations and communities. And it was developed by bringing together a group of child rights practitioners to have a chat about what the recommendations mean to them in their current work, in their future work, and to think about how together we could draw on existing tools, existing resources, experience that would be helpful to others who are looking to work in this area. So when you look at the guide, it has two main sections. The first section is talking about what the resolution is and why it's important for civil society. This gives an overview of the resolution recommendations. It talks about what Human Rights Council resolution is and isn't, and how such resolutions can be used in advocacy. And the second major part of the guide is looking at how civil society can take action to support the practical implementation of the resolution. And what this did was group a fairly long set of recommendations into 5 areas of focus. So these are: 1, supporting children's participation in environmental decision-making and action; 2, ensuring children's health and the health of their environments; 3, influencing UN activities and the international conversation in this area; 4, encouraging all business activities to be child rights responsive; and 5, strengthening children's access to justice when environmental harm does occur. And each of these subsections outlines the key recommendations in relation to that issue and offers an introductory set of practical recommendations or suggestions for follow-up. These include things like where you can find out where your government is already taking action or has committed to taking action in relation to a particular question, useful resources that others might want to share, suggesting how you might advocate for specific change or who to contact, and so on, depending on the section. And I would say you can use the guide in various ways. Obviously, reading it and sharing the resolution is the first key step. I think sitting down with your colleagues or with a group of children or others that you're working with to work your way through the sections and the questions will give you a baseline for what your government is doing or not doing, which you can then use to refer back to as you progress through your work. And also gives you sort of a foundation for then going more specifically into an advocacy plan, using the template or adapting that as might be useful to get quite specific in your context for thinking about, well, who would you target? Who would you collaborate with? What's the timeline? What upcoming opportunities for intervention are available, and so on. Or if you work in a particular field, but not on child's rights, this might be an interesting way in for you to understand more. For example, if you work already on business and human rights, but you haven't already integrated a child's rights perspective, you can go to that section and understand a bit more about what it means to what does child's rights due diligence mean in relation to businesses? Where can you find out more about that? Or how to integrate child's rights perspectives into a national action plan. And also, just finally, it will be an important reference tool to come back to in upcoming and continuing conversations. So as we work out collectively how we are interpreting the right to a healthy environment and other human rights, there's useful information here as the Committee on the Rights of the Child drafts its general comment on climate change and children and so on. So I'll just leave it there, but happy to answer other questions.
Thank you, Susie. So yeah, just to check out the different sections mentioned by Susie. Our colleagues have the links to these tools, including the first two, and in the chat box. And I understand that the presentations and the recording of this webinar will also be shared to you later. So I myself am a member of a civil society organization, and I have observed that there is a need to strengthen the link of child rights advocacy work in different levels. So there are many outputs from international processes, which was just mentioned by Susie, one of them, which can help in strengthening the advocacies at national and local levels. And there are also many cases at the national and local levels, which will definitely help in universalizing the promotion and protection of children's rights to a healthy environment. So it's good to hear of ways by which we can make the link between this be more visible. And to add more insights about this, I would like to request my partner, Laure, to please share how Save the Children has used the resolution so far in its work.
Thank you, Inda. Thank you all. Just quickly to say, I mean, this resolution, as pointed out by Susie, is a great commitment from states on what needs to happen to ensure the protection of children from environmental harm, including climate change. So we believe this resolution will not have any value unless it's known by all of us and it's used practically, and this is why this tool is here. So we have used the resolution to promote advocacy, to formulate advocacy messages in recent report. For example, this report SAVE has a release called Born into the Climate Crisis report, where we have recommendations about implementation of this resolution. And we refer to it, for example, just in a recent example, as we did a context analysis and we were talking to a specific state with regards to funding from the Green Climate Fund. And that for us, it was showing that this is a commitment from the state, which was part of the council as well. So for us, it's useful in so many ways, and I will not, unfortunately, not have the time to share more today, just accept the fact that it's being actually, the resolution itself is being developed into a child-friendly version by some of my colleagues. And so that also will be very useful, I think, for Elsa and other children that are engaging in in environmental issues and children's rights. Yeah, so I will take it from here, Inda, maybe to just say thank you so much, everyone engaging in the chat box and the Q&A. I just wanted to highlight maybe a couple of questions that were also shared prior to this webinar. When you registered, there were some questions raised with for the panelists, in addition to what has been sent now. I think, Susie, since you just were talking about the resolution, maybe I will start with some questions to you. I mean, I will say the questions and maybe I'd say who would be the one answering them, but feel free, panelists, to intervene as well if you feel you have an answer. Susie, it says, how can children work with the resolution? What advocacy messages could people working at country level have on this? I think you already touched upon it a bit, but that's one of the questions raised. Another question that was raised was perhaps what in your view is the from this resolution in the climate crisis, what practical measures does it propose to safeguard children's rights to a healthy environment? I believe that much of it has been also answered, but just in case you would like to highlight anything regarding these questions. And then there's a question that maybe I will turn to Sean, perhaps. Why has research on the link or the effect between a safe, healthy environment and children's rights been ignored till recently? That was a question also raised during as we prepared for upon registration. So I will stop here and just leave the space for Susie and Sean perhaps to just quickly get back to us on this. And All the questions will be answered in writing and shared with all of you after this webinar. Thank you. Susie?
Sure. The first question was about developing advocacy messages. Is that right? Yeah, so I think, I mean, this resolution is going to be incredibly helpful because it's very specific on a range, not just climate, but like a range of environmental harms and what states should be doing. And while it's not legally binding in itself, resolutions are drawing on existing frameworks and binding instruments in many cases. So I think it's about being strategic where you use these, keep referring back to these messages, particularly if your state was one of the sponsor states to this resolution, and there's information about how to find that out. But looking for opportunities in where new laws or policies are being prepared, where budgets are being prepared, when litigation happens and so on, to keep bringing these messages in and repeating them in those spaces. And the question on right to a healthy environment, this obviously, this resolution came out prior to the UN Human Rights Council recognizing a right to a healthy environment. So things have moved on slightly, but as mentioned, that as all human rights is a contested space, and people have different interests and aims in relation to how rights are implemented and interpreted in practice. So I think coming back to this is a useful tool for working out collectively what that right means in practice and in local contexts.
Thank you, Susie. Sean, would you like to address why has not been any research on the link or effect between healthy environment and children's rights? Has been ignored until recently. That was the way the question was formulated.
Yeah, I think there's a number of layers to that, maybe that we can't go into in depth each one now, but I don't think it hasn't necessarily been ignored, I would say. I think the understanding of the linkages between the environment and human rights, obviously it goes all the way back to Stockholm, the 50th anniversary of which we'll be celebrating this year. And we've had successive reports from independent experts and special rapporteurs which have dug into the links and repeatedly highlighted children as being among the vulnerable cohorts highlighted in those reports. So I think maybe it's more that we're seeing, you know, you have to go, it wasn't until Cancun under the UNFCCC that we started to see the link between human rights and climate change. Obviously Paris was the first time we actually saw that link properly formalized in the agreement, and so I think we're seeing an entire system move through, percolate through this reality of the very serious rights-based impacts of environmental issues and climate change, and there is research there, and more is being added to that stock. So you know, 1989, the convention was drafted, and you know, we didn't have a UNFCCC, we didn't have the Rio process. So those, you know, a lot has happened in 30 years.
Thank you so much, Sean and Susie. Time is short. I wish we had more time to talk today. So I really want to make sure we have time to give to Professor Benyam Mizmour, who's joined us from Boston now. You are the UN committee member who's we honored today to have in this call. Before giving you the floor, Benyam, I just wanted to actually say, everyone, I will give Benyam the floor to reflect on what has been said, also to close this meeting. So that's why before I give you the floor, Benyam, I want to encourage everybody on the call to visit the website, to check out these tools, and to be in touch if you have any questions or any feedback, or if you have any tools that you already use daily but we don't know of. So if you want to give tips to other colleagues, just get in touch, and we will share all the contact details as well, together with the recording of this session. So thank you all so much, and I give the floor to Benyam to reflect and close this meeting. Thank you so much, Benyam, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Laurie. It's a pleasure to be here. When I was contacted to say a few words as a final remark, I thought about it and I said, I looked at the profile of the people that are present. I could already anticipate some of the remarks that would be made, and I was not terribly sure what my added value could potentially be. But then I reflected a bit more and said, if I speak more at the level of the policy and some of the issues that we see as the Committee on the Rights of the Child, instead of talking about the nitty-gritty details and maybe talking about SACHI and concluding observations and so forth, I thought it might be a good closing. So let me just start by saying a few words as a precursor. The environment, the word environment is referred to 9 times in the convention, starting in the preamble. But in the majority of instances, it is in respect of family environment. But fortunately for us, as the Committee on the Rights of the Child, fortunately for children, Article 24 actually makes specific reference to the environment in the context of pollution, in the context of climate change. It talks about risks of environmental pollution, environmental sanitation, and the prevention of accidents, and so forth. So there is a clear recognition from the get-go in the convention about children's exceptionalism when it comes to the right to a healthy environment, when it comes to climate change, biodiversity, and so forth. The stage of physiological and cognitive development and innate curiosity, as we say, that children have, would have its own exceptionalism in terms of the risks. One can just simply look at the data, and I'm just going to throw one example here. Air pollution causes 7 million premature deaths annually, including 600,000 children under the age of 5, not under the age of 18, under the age of 5. So if you're talking about their unique metabolism, if you're talking about physiology, if you're talking about developmental needs, global warming is definitely a threat multiplier. So it's not by default, but it's by design that we actually have Article 24 and a number of provisions within the Convention on the Rights of the Child play a very critical role. Now, having said this as a precursor, let me just say a few things. The first is that the whole climate change conversation or environmental harm, it's not the great equalizer. Yes, it poses a threat to the entire human race, definitely, but people are not equally affected. In fact, it is those who have contributed least to greenhouse gas emissions, the poorest people, the most economically weak nations, and of course, we also talk about future generations that happen to be the hardest hit, particularly in this case, in the context of climate change. So it's important to recognize that in our reflections when we talk about the right to a healthy environment and when information comes to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. The second point is a word of caution. And to a certain extent, the importance of making the child rights approach central, but also acknowledging some of the limitations of the human rights discourse. I had the opportunity to look at a number of reports, but just looked at one just recently, a UNEP report, which provides examples of measures undertaken to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change, which can themselves actually adversely affect the enjoyment of human rights. We know of cases of hydroelectric and biofuel projects that have resulted in human rights violations, or implementation of resettlement programs that have significant negative implications for the lived reality of children and their rights. So when we talk about the conversation about the right to a healthy environment and some of the information that we would like to bring, including using through this tool that filters to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, should also include some of these negative consequences that are bringing about negative effect on children's rights under the guise of addressing the right to a healthy environment, under the guise of addressing climate change. Now, let me move to, I'm a lawyer by training. Quite a lot of the conversations about climate change and some of the points that have also come from the dialogue here relate to climate justice and access to courts and the importance of the courts and so forth. I often ask myself the question, can the courts fix this? I refer to David Boyd, the special rapporteur on the environment. And he provided some information a few months ago, and I mentioned that information. Over the past 20 years, 1,800 climate change cases have been brought before national courts and tribunals. And he said he has identified 38 cases brought by children or youth in 16 nations, beginning from 2011. Out of these cases, only 2, and I repeat this, only 2 of those cases have been successful on the merits. 20 cases have been dismissed, often without the merits even being addressed. 12 cases are still pending, and so forth. Remarkably, he says, Not one of these court decisions has referred to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. No one has explained states' obligations to ensure that the best interest of the child shall be the primary consideration in taking climate action. So this clearly shows some of the limitations and some of the challenges that we face in moving forward. The solution that there have been some conversation that some of the solution might be found at the international level. That may be true, but the majority of the solution should actually be found at the national level, including through litigation. Now, one point that I just want to mention here is the extent to which states give recognition to the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and its effect at the domestic level is absolutely critical for us to make progress in relation to the right to a healthy environment. Now, let me move on. Good practices are also absolutely critical. And this tool can actually help us to bring about some of the good practices that states can learn from each other, that localities and municipalities can learn from each other, that different treaty bodies can also learn from each other. Unless we invest quite a bit on good practices, how do we even see ourselves convincing China or India that actually worked very hard to change in the Glasgow discussions, the notion, the text that said to phase out coal to be changed to a phase down of coal. So good practices remain to be critical, including in the context of children's rights. And I'm going to finish in a moment. Cooperation remains to be a critical element throughout the implementation of the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly in this case, in relation to the provisions that are relevant to the right to a healthy environment. The duty of cooperation, of course, it plays a secondary role. At the national level, states have the primary responsibility to safeguard human rights of people within their jurisdiction. But there are, of course, a number of jurisdictions related, extraterritorial jurisdiction related issues that still need clarity from jurisprudence. Global warming definitely threatens human rights on a global scale, and it definitely requires a global response. And it's absolutely critical for politicians, for different stakeholders, including children's civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, to help bring about some clarity of thought in terms of what cooperation should entail and what the limits of cooperation are. The final point. There are a few things that one can say about moving away from the small island states to help us champion this cause. The conversation, including through using these tools, should not just only be focused on Nauru, Tuvalu, Samoa, Madagascar, and so forth. The issue that we're dealing with, the right to a healthy environment, is not just only the small island states, but it's also relevant for all 196 states parties to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. My final point, what have we learned from the COVID pandemic in relation to the right to a healthy environment? Have we learned anything? I believe we should. For example, strengthening environmental rule of law, the need to protect environmental rights defenders, it's absolutely critical. The need to protect child human rights defenders that are working in relation to the right to a healthy environment is absolutely critical. There are a number of states that we have seen that use COVID as an excuse to limit interactions. For example, in Glasgow, there were some complaints about the ability to observe, interact, and intervene in negotiations on a number of topics that was limited for civil society organizations and a number of other stakeholders. And that should be one of the lessons that we have learned. Minimizing the harmful impacts of medical waste and its implications for the right to a healthy environment is one of the other lessons that we have learned. But one of the important lessons that I believe that we should learn is the importance of collaboration between governments, international partners, civil society, activists, the private sector, and all individual and peoples that actually are affected or could potentially be affected in the future and have a stake in this whole process to uphold the right to a healthy environment. I am fairly confident as the committee, we often say we are as good as the information base that is before us, and these tools will help us to move in that direction in a very concrete manner. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Benyam. Thank you, everyone who's joined us today, participants, panelists, interpreters, everyone. As I said, I wish this was longer because there's so many questions, so many issues I would like to discuss with all of you. But really, thank you so much. It's the beginning. It's one way to the flash on this issue and to get insight and ideas on how best to advance children's rights to a healthy environment. There's many other work being done by so many, and I think it's very important to consider the human rights frameworks and to take into account all states' commitments and that are being regularly taken for this, and we need to hold them to account in order to make sure there's some positive change for everyone. And thank you, Binyam, for the closing remarks, and thank you all. To be continued. Get in touch with us as well if you have any ideas and reflections, and be assured that we will answer your questions in writing as much as possible following this webinar. Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello.
June.
Just leave this as everybody fade out.
Well done, everybody.
And not to forget. Okay. Stop the recording. Okay.